There we go. Welcome, everybody. We are recording live. We are here for the webinar, the joint webinar of Rea Cultura and the Culture Mastery on how to build cultural bridges between the United States and Mexico. Thank you for taking time to join us today. With me is my colleague and dear friend from Mexico, Salvador. And Salvador, I'll let you pronounce your name fully and explain who you are in just 2 minutes. My name is Christian Höferle. Ooh, that is not a very American name. No, I am not American by birth. However, I came here as soon as I could. I live in the United States on the East Coast, or in the Eastern time zone, not on the coast. I live in the city of Atlanta, German by birth, American by choice, if you will. So I will be sharing with you the US perspective, and my colleague Salvador will be illuminating the Mexican side of things. You're here because you want to learn and find out or get confirmation on what you already know. What are the cultural differences between Mexico and the US, and how can we go about closing them or build bridges across these gaps? Salvador, why don't you say hello to the crowd here and introduce yourself?
Yeah. As you said, my first name is Salvador. For a lot of people, it's complicated to pronounce. It was precisely people in the US when I was a kid back in the 70s that they renamed me Sal, which is a lot easier to pronounce, and I like it pretty much. Then my last name, it's a complication because, you know, Mexicans is a cultural difference. Mexicans and Latins, we use father name and mother name. So it first goes the father name, which in Brazil is exactly the other way around. So in Mexico, we have father name, which would be father family name, which would be Rodriguez Gil, which is another complication because it's a compound name. So it's two words, but one name, it's a mess. The story of my life. And then my mother's name is Batista. So that makes a very long name. I am Mexican by birth. I lived in in Spain for 3 years, and I've come back and forth to the US several times in my life. I worked for a US company for 2 years, being in the US a week, a month, every month. I have family in the US. My sister is married to an American. I have cousins and an aunt, so there's a lot of influence from both sides. So I have Spanish influence and American influence.
Beautiful. So the full name is Salvador Rodriguez Gil Batista.
Yeah.
That's a mouthful.
But I always say, my mom, sorry, mom, I'm not going to use your name because it becomes already too long.
So if you were to introduce yourself to somebody in the US and they expect a first name and a last name, what would you give them? Would you give them the full name, or would you reduce yourself?
I would just give them the Rodriguez Gil using the hyphen.
Mm-hmm.
It should have the hyphen, but the judge, when I was born and registered back in '64, just forget to put the hyphen. So ever since I suffer without a hyphen, but it should have a hyphen. So for non-official documents, I always use it precisely to avoid this confusion. But in official documents, my birth certificate, my passport, my ID, my driver's license has to be separate, two separate words. So it's a silly thing, but you know, that's what happens.
So now, folks, you know it. So we will, at the end of the session, you will know how to pronounce Salvador's name and my name, and it will be a party because we'll all laugh about how we mispronounce each other's names. So
right.
Salvador and I decided to have a webinar a little bit different today. Rather than walking you through slides and doing content modules that I talk and he talks and I talk again, we decided we're just going to have a loose conversation around this topic, as if you were meeting us in a restaurant or at a bar or at a networking event, and we would be chatting. And this is what we thought for. It's December. People are already getting into the celebration mood, and
right.
Let's be honest. How much work are you getting done? And you're here, so you're not getting work done while you're here. So let's make this a little bit more casual than usual.
Mm-hmm.
And we invite you to join in. So if you have a question or a comment, please use the chat box. So if you go to the toolbar of the Zoom webinar platform, you will find, if you don't see it displayed in that gray or black bar, there should be 3 dots with the word more to it. So you can click on that and you will see chat. So you can click on the chat and you can send us a message. And I'm doing so right now. I'm sending a message to all of you. And if you haven't found your chat window, maybe now you're seeing it because there is something blinking in your toolbar. So this is how you get in touch. Now, as you see, you're now chatting to all panelists. You can also have a drop down and you can select which panelist or whom you want to address a question to. You can chat with Salvador individually or with me so that the other panelists don't see it, because you may not be comfortable sharing your question in the big room. That is perfectly fine. We respect your privacy, and we will address your question then anonymously, or maybe even after this webinar in a one-on-one. Any of these varieties, any of these options work for us. We want to be here for you. This is to serve you and answer your questions, and not for us to make this a free-for-all and maybe put somebody on the spot. So with that being said, we do have slides. So it's not like we're going to just babble here and have like a radio conversation. We do have some information prepared for you, and we would like for you to understand some of these things that throw people for a loop. You may have watched the news lately. The US government and the governments of Canada and Mexico have been renegotiating the free trade agreement that has been in place for, 25 or so years. The NAFTA agreement is being reworked because one government of the 3 decided it's not up to the times anymore. And we're not getting into the politics of this. I think what you should be aware of is that the rules of engagements are changing, and we are getting very close to an agreement between the 3 North American nations. So trade and business across the Rio Grande or the Rio Bravo will continue regardless of how this agreement will look like. And no matter how the agreement between those 3 countries change, the cultural differences between the English-speaking part of North America and the Spanish-speaking part of North America will be untouched by that. You will still deal with the cultural differences. They will still impact you in business and otherwise. Salvador, can you share some differences that you see with your clients over and over again? What do some American companies or North American companies struggle with when they come to the Mexican market?
Yeah, you said something really nice, and I think that's the first issue that they encounter. You said the Spanish-speaking part of North America. A lot of people don't consider Mexico part of North America, and not only in the U.S. but also in Europe. You know, I just confirmed with recently with a Spanish colleague and a German colleague that they are taught in school that Central America starts in Mexico, which is, from the geographical point of view, totally incorrect. Actually, everything that is from the equator up, that should be North America. So including Central America, that should be North America. Colombia should be North America. Venezuela should be North America. If we're cutting the world into, 2 sections. Right. But yeah, so that's one of the first things, The other thing is, a lot of people, not only in the US, they say, Mexico, neighbor to the US, everybody speaks English. Surprise, surprise, not even 10% of the population do. So that's a main difference. Another difference that I've encountered I've encountered positive and negative differences. A positive difference is that they see Mexicans are very committed. Mexicans are hard worker. They need to work wiser instead of harder, but they are already hard workers. But yeah, they need to work wiser. So they like Mexican employees because they're very engaged. They're very committed. If they need to pull up their sleeves and get dirty, they do it. Now, of course, that goes into sometimes abuse and excess and extreme, which is the negative side of it. But that's how they like. Some years ago, I was training an expat from Coca-Cola, and her husband stayed in the US. And he said he was staying in the US because he was not going to close his company. He had his own company in the US. And he said that he liked, and he only had, well, that's what she told me, that her husband only liked and only hired Mexican employees for two main reasons: better prepared and more committed. So he says, I don't want any other employee. I like these two things of my Mexican employees. And believe it or not, a lot of small and mid-sized companies in the US were found and are managed by Mexican nationals. Mm-hmm. So that's the main difference. And of course, time, hierarchy, and communication will be the three main cultural differences between the US and Mexico. And we'll get into that more in detail as we move forward.
Thank you for that. And this is something I can echo from the other side of the borderline. Many U.S. Companies that I work with, or it doesn't matter if they're U.S. owned companies, sometimes they're global organizations with a U.S. presence, they mm-hmm. find that in the labor market, especially when it comes to skilled labor, production, manufacturing, that Mexicans, or to be a little bit more broad, people of Latin background have mm-hmm. a different level of identification with the company. Yep. They're yep. more group oriented, as we will discuss today, and the group orientation extends to the company that one works for, because you buy into that organization and you see the growth and the well-being of the company as part of your own growth and well-being. Right. Therefore, there is a higher degree of identification with the employer, even though mm-hmm. sometimes the employer will misuse that level of right. relationship. So Americans, on the other hand, and this is what people outside of North America often underestimate, is they're very individualistic, and they will change companies on the flip of a coin, or on a whim, because they will make more money elsewhere, or they can see their careers being furthered at another company, and they have mm-hmm. no hesitation to drop that and leave that. Right. I'm currently right. working with a coaching client who lives in the United States, who actually was born in the United States. He was born in New York City, and his parents are not from Mexico, but he has got two parents, one from Costa Rica and one from El Salvador. So mm-hmm. he's a Salvatico, so to say. However, he's born in the United States, and he's struggling to change companies right now. So he is unhappy with the current work he's doing, and he knows he can grow with another company, and yet he mm-hmm. feels a level of guilt if he is now looking for a new job while he's still being employed at the company that he's not too happy with.
Oh yeah.
So that just goes to show that you don't have to be a Mexican or Guatemalan or Nicaraguan and live in Mexico to have that level of group orientation. Even Americans, North Americans any North American with a Latino background may have that in their upbringing, that mm-hmm. level of belonging. So he feels a level of guilt. So this just as one example. What we developed for you here, dear friends from across the globe, that you're on this webinar today, and whether it's evening or lunchtime or morning, wherever you are, we're happy that you're here. You may have been on a webinar with me before, and you may have seen this little equation before. Salvador and I, we feel strongly that every one of our webinars, every one of our presentations needs to have this, just to drive the mm-hmm. point home. If you want to grow globally, if you want to take advantage and benefit from the global internationalization, the expansion of your business outside of your native boundaries, outside of your native culture and country, there's a couple of factors that play into this. Obviously, it matters what your deal value is abroad. So how much business can you do? Well, that's the number of business, the number of business opportunities, how many new jobs, how many new projects, how many new clients can you win by going outside of your native country? And how much money can you make by dealing with people outside of your country? So those are obvious growth factors. Detrimental to that growth is how long will it take you to learn the business in that new world, in that new market? How often will you fail? How often will you not be successful? So those are the detrimental factors. And here is the factor that Salvador and I address. We call it ICE-Q. It's the combination of IQ, CQ being cultural intelligence, and EQ, emotional intelligence. So you want not only to know your subject matter expertise in your field, you also want to be emotionally competent to communicate efficiently, effectively, and impactfully across the world. And in order to do so, you want to understand the cultures of the people you're dealing with. So this is a critical factor in your global growth formula. Mind, heart, and globe. This is how we symbolize it. And just imagine if you can increase that ICE-Q by 10% or more and decrease your failure rate and shorten your learning curve. Well, we chose a little rocket here to illustrate how your global growth curve will point upwards. If you can address these two factors, everybody who's done simple math in middle school knows what it means if you lower the number under that little black line here and increase the number on top of that black line. It will make the number here grow. That's the simple math behind it. So that is why you're here. That is why it is important to have the cultural intelligence of the markets you're dealing with. And you need to be aware that there are different perspectives in different markets. So, Salvador, what are some of those roadblocks you see mainly?
The main roadblocks, and you have it here, it's hierarchy, time management, task and your relationship orientation, communication, and assessment tool. For communication, I always encourage the expats I train, and I will encourage this in this webinar. Eliminate from your vocabulary the word discuss. Discuss in English means what we're doing, analyzing a topic in depth or exchanging points of view. In Spanish, sounds very similar. Discutir sounds like discuss. And the meaning is very similar. If you go to a Spanish dictionary, you find three meanings. Two meanings are what I just mentioned, analyze a topic in depth or interchange opinions. But the third meaning in Spanish is to argue, to fight. So unconsciously, if you tell a Mexican manager, let's discuss the budget, he immediately becomes defensive and say, why are we going to discuss the budget? Can we just talk nicely about it? Why do we have to fight over it, right? Let's discuss your forecast. No. So use, let's talk about, tell me about it. Let's see and analyze any synonym without using the word discuss, either in Spanish or English, just eliminate it. And that will help things to move quite faster because then they don't get defensive. Talking about hierarchy.
That's a critical point. Let me jump in on that because this I find this often to be a big challenge for any cross-cultural pairing or any multicultural context, that when we use a foreign language, we still use it with our hard drive, right? It's almost like our operating system, let's say my operating system is German, it's become Americanized, but still it's mainly German. When I use English application that I use on that operating system, I still use it with my German operating system. So if an English-speaking person from North America speaks Spanish, they still do that with a North American operating system. So no matter how fluent they are in Spanish, no matter how strong their vocabulary is, sometimes they will use words the way their operating system remembers them, and it'll come out the wrong way. So that is why, actually, before we went live on this webinar, I was contacted by a friend of mine who runs a language training school, especially with the Mexican-U.S. Connection, and she says, I can't be on, I'll miss it, I hate to miss it. I say, well, we'll record it for you and send it to you. She has that issue on a day-to-day with her clients, that these little linguistic twists, they can throw the whole conversation down the gutter. Over to you, Sal.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, also talking about communication, most US Americans are low context communicators, which means little information about it, just the message. And they're very direct communicators, not as direct as Dutch or not as direct as other cultures, but they're pretty direct. And also they're very informal, whereas Mexicans are very formal when speaking. And then of course English doesn't have what German and Spanish and Japanese and other languages have. we have the possibility of using formal and informal way of speaking, which in the US, it's you, and that's it, right? In Spanish, we have tú and usted, and in French and in German and Portuguese is very similar, tú and usted, right? So Mexicans are very formal, US Americans are informal. And then Mexicans are, I mean, you've seen me, I cannot stand still like this. I mean, I've been touching my face, moving my mobile, etc. Because this is about we use a lot our body language to express. We use our hands and we do gestures and we move our body, etc., etc. And to the US, that's aggressive because most US Americans are very straightforward, almost not moving, So that's a main difference. But
I noticed that, and sometimes I sometimes notice that when I'm sometimes fairly expressive in my body language as well. That's not a very German thing. However, I think I spend a lot of time with people from the Mediterranean area, so I like to be expressive in my body language, and sometimes I notice that just what you said, that my North American or my English speaking counterparts are backing off a little bit because they're not quite sure what to make that mean.
Exactly. And they don't know if you're being, and let me tell you, Brazilians are even worse than we are. They even point at you, right on your face, and he's like, I don't have a problem. But I always tell them, don't do that, because Mexicans are gonna feel very attacked. No, they're gonna feel that you are confronting them, and that's something Mexicans don't like. They are confront avoidant all the time. My significant other, she keeps on saying, I don't like to discuss, because she doesn't like to fight. Nobody likes to fight, right? But in her mind, again, going to the discuss term. And because of this communication, she's very indirect. She's a typical example of the indirect Mexicans. And there are a few of us that are very direct. Mexicans in the north of the country, which are of a different indigenous origin as well, and then the influence of the US, there are a lot more direct speakers than people in the center or in the south. Southeast, it's even worse than in the center. I mean, there are a lot more indirect. And that's, again, because not only the influence of being close to the US, but also the indigenous influence. They don't have the Aztec influence. They have other groups. Here in the center, we have Aztec and Maya. And in the languages these communities speak, they use the inconditional form of the verb to show indirectness. So sometimes when you go to buy something and you're going to pay, you go to the cashier and then say, it would be 700 pesos instead of it is 700. So it's like, because for them, it is sounds too direct, too aggressive. So that's another difference. In the US, you have to soften the way you speak. Maybe you can be very direct in the message, but just the words you use to make it indirect.
So let's break this down for a real life situation. So imagine I were an English speaker from North America, and I would be put into a leadership position in my company in Mexico, and many of my team members are Mexicans, and I want them to follow my instructions. I want to lead them effectively. How do I need to adjust my communication to them so I become effective with them?
There's a phrase that helps with this a lot. Think of this: a suggestion given, it's an order taken. So if you disguise your order as a suggestion, how about if we do this? They're in their mind going to say, oh, this is an order Christian is giving, so then they go ahead and comply. Not all the time, not 100%, but most of the time they're going to do that. Oh, he's just suggesting, that means he's disguising his order. Now, the risk there is that sometimes when you're truly suggesting and then just follow up and say, oh, whoa, hold on, this is only a suggestion, right? But that helps a lot. How about, why don't we, back home we do this, and how about if we implement it? You're giving an instruction, but you're disguising.
So now that's a good distinction you make. So if I were to say, well, let's brainstorm some ideas, and how about we do this? What do you guys think of this? So do I need to pre-frame that and say, hey, I'm not saying we're doing it this way. I want your input.
Exactly. And now you said something interesting about the brainstorming. Brainstorming is a very US practice that a lot of companies and culture have adopted. But Mexicans, they feel uncomfortable sharing their ideas. So it's going to take time. Eventually they do it, but you have to joke with them. You have to, for example, something I say all the time when I'm in a group, and I just gave a conference at my university last week. I told them, all right, why are you here? Why do you think you're here? Silence, And the joke I said to break the ice, and they're university students, right, and younger Mexicans. And I told them, all right, one by one, don't want to speak all at the same time. So everybody laughs, and then they start raising their hands, because they are just there waiting for me to say something.
So you have to give them official permission to make them feel comfortable speaking up. Okay, great.
Yeah, now, a little joke or a little comment.
All right, then let's move to the next slide. So how does hierarchy play into that?
Hierarchy is a very complex situation to understand for many cultures, even other Latins, because I may say that Mexico, within the Latin scenario, is the most hierarchical country. After the Japanese and the Arabians, or the Asians that are not Japanese, that they are the most hierarchical cultures, then Mexico is right behind them. That's why you have to disguise your order as a suggestion. That's why you have to speak nicely to them, to be very polite, because in their mind, they don't know how to question the authority, because they think that the authority is precisely that. That's why he or she is the authority, because he or she knows everything. So, and that person is there to fix things. So they need to learn how to question the authority, of course, with respect, how to negotiate with authority. Look, boss, I'm sorry, but I cannot deliver that on Tuesday as you wanted. I may have it ready for Thursday. And then you negotiate, no, Thursday is too late. How about Wednesday? All right, Wednesday afternoon, fine. And then, so then you agree. For them, that's very tough to do. If you tell them Wednesday, they're going to do whatever they can to have it ready on Wednesday, or they're going to give you a lot of excuses why they didn't have it for Wednesday, right?
So
they think for them that's better than just negotiating.
So if I were the English-speaking North American, and my boss is a Mexican, and I feel that my boss is making a decision that is not helpful. So in the US, I have learned it's okay to go to my boss, maybe not in the group, but in a one-on-one, and say, hey, boss, I think we're making a mistake, and here's why. Would that be okay with a Mexican boss, or do I need to find a different way to address that?
You can do it, but in a different way, again, disguising. Instead of saying, I think because, remember, a lot of managers they say they're open doors, but they're not truly. They say they are open to criticism, but they're not really open. So you have to come and say, look, I'm sorry, always apologizing. It's a very apologetic culture. So even though you don't need to apologize for anything, but you would do that. It's like, excuse me, boss, could I have 5 minutes to talk to you? Or could I, being very polite, and then saying, you mentioned this, but I don't think this is the best way we can do things. Why don't you, like a suggestion, like something you're thinking of, and hopefully the manager will be open and say, I think you have a point. But you may find that manager says, no, that's the way it goes, and end of the story. So that's complicated. But and precisely that's the complicated part, when you're an American and your boss is Mexican.
So it's important then to note that a Mexican leader does not like to be challenged often, or at least not challenged openly and directly. And a US leader would think that he or she is ineffective if their team members aren't coming to them with better ideas. So that leads to a different expectation on leadership and how work is distributed and how feedback is given. So keep that in mind as you go about.
Yeah. And one of the reasons is precisely what it says here in the slide: social status, social class. In their mind, their managers, and if it's a foreign manager, it's a superior being. It's someone that is not going to be questioned because he or she knows everything. And if he or she doesn't know everything, well, then he or she will manage how to get it right, So that's why. Young generations are less hierarchical and they're more able to do it, but not everybody.
Okay. So if there's two questions I have around this. So would then would a Mexican not question their boss even they know that their boss is wrong? They would still let the boss fail because it's not their job to question that.
Exactly. Or they would mention someone around, or someone who can be a delegate who goes and talks to that manager, or they will run the rumor so he or she gets the rumor, and then he or she knows that they're not happy with the decision. But a lot of them will not do it directly, even though not only the boss, but the whole team will fail. You know?
Okay. Now, the second question I have is social status. So in the US, officially, there are no social strata. The US,
Right.
at least on paper, think of themselves as an even playing field, an egalitarian society where every
Mhm.
member of society has equal worth. Now,
Right.
in Mexico, that's not quite the case.
Exactly.
What are the class distinctions, or what are the social levels? Just a quick description.
Yeah, the social levels are connected with two main factors: color of your skin, how
Hmm.
dark or how light it is,
Hmm.
and the socioeconomical level you belong to. If you belong to a high class, economically speaking, or you're middle class or you're low class.
Okay.
Unfortunately, middle class is almost inexistent, and not from the economical point of view. A lot of people from the middle class, we call them aspire. You know, they are aspirational. They would like to be part of the next social class, but they can't. And then sometimes they have attitudes like, you know, they feel superior because their skin is a little bit lighter than mine, for example, or whatever the case may be. And that is something that is quite complicated. And now with the new government and the new things that are going around, a lot of people are beginning to say, look, this is not nice. Let's stop these BS, because there's no such thing as being superior or inferior. But
Hmm.
this is something so old
Hmm.
that it's being in the country and it's being promoted and it's being fostered for at least 500 years. So
So
that's complicated to move.
in the United States and in many European cultures, the level of
Mhm.
education also plays a role in how much you're
Mhm.
being respected in public. Is
Mhm.
educate? So you mentioned skin color and financial strength. So is
Right.
education, or maybe a professional track record, maybe professional success stories, do
Also,
that
yeah.
play in that as well?
Also, that plays a role, and we even have a phrase in Mexico. You have to look. I mean, or you have to portray what you are. I mean, if you're a lawyer, look like a lawyer. If you're a doctor, look like a doctor, right? That's why formality is important and image is important for Mexicans.
Okay.
Because, yeah, you may be a CEO, you may be very well capable and skillful, but if you're wearing a t-shirt or a shirt like the one you're wearing without a suit, without a tie, you're going to a meeting with a CEO, that's going to be a no-no, right?
So
If you're
if
going
if
to a
I
meeting,
go like this with an open collar and a t-shirt underneath, shirt sleeves, that would not be business professional, right?
exactly,
Okay.
exactly. Mexicans will say,
Forgive me, Salvador.
how, no, don't worry. Actually, we're doing it on purpose. We're using these as examples, you know. But and this is changing. Now you see less and less men wearing a complete suit and a tie. It's
Hmm.
more common that you see them wearing a suit, a coat, but with a dress shirt, or even with a sports shirt, or with a t-shirt, with jeans, or with dress pants. You know. But the thing is, that is changing. But still, there are people that are very formal, and it's still into the mindset, you know, we're formal, I have to show how professional I am, you know,
Okay.
because also that's the way they treat you, you know. Sometimes I get dressed like you are, or you know, very casual, and sometimes they give me a treatment like saying, I mean, what's wrong with you? I mean, I'm not inferior just because I'm casual today, you know. But sometimes they treat you like that, as if you're an inferior being, even though you're not, you know.
So the looks can sometimes be
Yeah.
misleading because somebody is actually dressing up
Hmm.
for a part, or they are in fact the guideline for behavior. That's fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
Hmm.
I thought let's include a little bit of a graphic here, because this compares the U.S. and Mexico with a few other countries on the grid. So you see uh, the what is it? The top down. That's the vertical, right? This is horizontal. So that's the vertical lines that tells you how top
Hmm.
down or consensual a national culture is, and the horizontal
Hmm.
line tells us how hierarchical or egalitarian cultures are. So you see here on
Right.
the hierarchical half, you see definitely Mexico on, as you said, on the
Hmm.
hierarchical side, and you said
Right.
yes, Japan, all many Arabic and
Asians,
Asian
yes.
cultures rank on the hierarchical side. And then you see is it a top-down type of hierarchy, or is it a hierarchy that builds consensus?
Like
So
the Japanese one.
right, you see Japan, you see Belgium, Germany fall into that quadrant. So here the United States are over here,
Hmm.
quite quite egalitarian, similar to many other Anglo-Saxon cultures, as
Mhm.
you can see in that same quadrant, also as the Scandinavian Nordic cultures are very egalitarian. You see, however, that the US fall into a top-down egalitarianism, which basically means that, yes, we understand that none of us is better than the other. However, we have a chain of command. We have a
Mhm.
a hierarchy, at least in the organization, that decides what happens. So
Right.
if we are in
Mhm.
disagreement, if the boss says this is what's going to happen, then everybody falls in line
Right.
and will follow that command. That doesn't make the boss a more important or more valuable person. It's just that, well, this is how we're going to do it as a team. And you see here,
And now you're saying that, something that came to my mind is, in the US, even if you don't agree with your boss, you can even say, look, I'm going to do it because you're my boss, about what you're saying, the chain of command, but I just want you to know that I don't agree. And the boss says,
exactly.
fine, you don't agree, but you're going to do it. And then you do
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Whereas that doesn't happen in Mexico.
Right, because
Mhm.
the egalitarianism allows them to. In Mexico, where it's more hierarchical and top down,
Mhm.
the employee would bite their tongue and shut their mouth and follow
Exactly.
the command. Right, so
Yep.
these are important factors to consider.
Mhm.
How do we view time, Salvador? I know that here in the US,
Excellent question. And
we view time very linear. In the US, we say time is money.
yeah, yeah,
¿Cómo se dice
that's
en
true.
español?
Let
La hora es
el dinero es tiempo, el tiempo es dinero.
el tiempo es dinero. Forgive my
Ajá,
Spanish.
exactly.
So
Yeah, don't worry.
how do
You speak some Spanish. I don't speak any German. Ik spreek kein
ah,
Dutch.
ah,
I can summarize these 6 or 7 lines into one. For Mexicans, there's always time. We even have a phrase that says, there's more time than life, like saying relax. I mean, you're gonna die before the time ends, so for us it's very circular. There's always day and night, 7 days over the week, 12 months of a year. So and some people even react to that. What's the rush? I'm handing in the report. Yeah, you didn't hand it at 11 o'clock. No, it's 11:30. It's just half an hour. What's the big fuss for that half an hour? They don't see what you just said earlier, that these overlapping, they don't see the consequence for me arriving or delivering or doing something
right.
late. Now, when they see this, they change it and they say, now I know. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Mexicans, what they do in the business scenario, they adapt themselves to this more punctual situation. I've seen companies, German companies, American companies, Canadian companies, that the people are used to being punctual and they arrive, let's say, 1-2 minutes late or after the time. Whereas in the social setting, it's just totally loose and totally relaxed, and you're going for lunch, it takes you 2 hours or 3.
Now, what would you say to, I mean, there's obviously that stereotype that North Americans or Western Europeans may have of Latino culture is that, well, they're not on time, and therefore I make that mean that they don't value me, or they don't take the work seriously, or they are
Excellent
lazy,
question.
or whatever you want to make that mean. And still, Mexican workforce gets stuff done. They show
Uh-huh.
results. So
Uh-huh.
how can you help take off that negative label of the
Mhm.
circular view of time?
Yeah. Let me tell you something that I said, because that was precisely the question of a young American expat that I trained a couple of years ago. He said, I'm from Chicago. I have Mexican friends. I like Mexicans, but I hate that they get late, they arrive late even to a party, And it goes to what you were asking. For Mexicans, and this is what I told him, for Mexicans is more important the person than the situation. So in a social setting, I don't mind if you arrive an hour late. I like that you arrive. Thank you, Christian, for coming to my party. I don't care if you arrive 2 or 3 hours late. I'm not even going to question, why are you arriving so late? You arrived. So in the business setting, what matters is I'm delivering the job. Half an hour late, fine. Yeah, it's not the deadline, but I'm delivering. That's what's important. That's what matters. So
Mm-hmm.
so for Mexicans, this is the important part, the human side, completing the task. Yeah, man, we didn't complete it the day you said or the hour you said, but we completed it. Now, they have to learn, of course, that there are certain things. For example, if you're in finance, if you're in accounting, there's only one December 31st when you close the year and you close the month. Fine. Every month has a last day, but December 2019, there's only one. And people in accounting, people in certain activities, they do have a linear perception. Engineers, for example, I've seen it in the automotive industry and in some other industries, in the aeronautical industry. Engineers, they do have a linear mindset. So they are more capable of adapting to these. But in their mind, they're not disrespecting you or not caring about you. On the contrary, because I care about you, I want to deliver these on time, so I'll deliver it. Yeah, maybe not on time, but I delivered it, and I delivered the way you wanted it.
And some of you will see the comment here. I hope that all of you see the comment from Karin, who's writing that they are on time. They just have a different concept of time. So
exactly.
In their mind, they're not really late. Thanks, Karin. That's pretty much spot on.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Excellent. So I don't think we need to go through this slide in more detail, but it compares the monochronic versus the polychronic mindsets.
I remember once a young American, when she saw these polychronic, she said, "Oh my God, I'm hyperventilating already."
Yeah, me too.
To her, it was too much of a chaos. Yeah, and you know, these reminds me. One of my definitions of Mexico is that it is a functional chaos. We do function. How? I don't know. In a chaos, yeah, we do, but we function. I mean, companies like Colgate, they've been doing business in Mexico for almost 100 years. And not only that, Colgate has the biggest plant they have worldwide here in Mexico. So we do things right, just in a different time.
Maybe the what did you say? Chaos?
It's a functional chaos.
A functional chaos. What comes to my mind is a bird's eye view of city traffic in Chicago and city traffic in Mexico City. People still make it to their destination somehow. It's just a different way. We talked about people orientation, how the group is oftentimes more important than the individual, and that it matters to honor the group interest and to see oneself, at least in Mexican culture, to see oneself as part of the group, because if I act in the interest of the group, then I'm also acting in my own interest because I'm part of that group. That mindset is not always as developed in North America. Depending on which subcultural groups you're talking about in the US, you will find it more in the Southeast, where the group interest may be a bit stronger developed than it is maybe in the Northeast of the United States. You also find it in Asian American culture. You find it in the Latino culture in the US, which is the biggest quote unquote minority in US society is Latino culture. There you will see it. I live in, as I said, I live in Atlanta, so I see it in the African American community a little bit more. So that stereotype that prevails of the US as a very individualistic society, I would say that is mainly true for what is still the majority of US culture, is the white, quote unquote, Caucasian majority of the US, which is often based on European immigration from Anglo-Saxon cultures, from Nordic cultures, from Central European cultures. So it's easy to paint that picture of the US as being a very individualistic society. Please keep in mind, if you're coming to the US for the first time, not everybody in the US is hyper individualistic. However, I think it is fair to say that people in Mexico overall are much more group oriented than US Americans overall.
Yes. And now you say that, something that comes to my mind for an example. If you enter a new job in Mexico, they will tour you around, you know, here's your office, here's the cafeteria, there's the bathroom, they tour you around. You get to the US, welcome, that's your office, that's it, right? If you ask questions, then the people will tell you, where's the gym? Over there. Where's the bathroom? Over there. But until you ask, they don't tell you, right? Because precisely it's individualistic. And in Mexico, you know, this phrase that I'm sure you're familiar, I mean, the audience, not only you, Christian, with the phrase, mi casa es tu casa, my house is your house. That's precisely what it means. I mean, my house, my company, my country, that's my house. So I want you to feel in my house, in your house. I want you to feel in your company and in the country the same way as you would feel in the US or wherever you come from. So that's why we're so more people-oriented and helping and welcoming. maybe not necessarily in depth, maybe not with everybody, like we don't make the best friends, but that's the way we treat people, because again, it's group harmony. Family is important. So now you become to my country, you come to my company. Now you're part of my family. You're one more in the group.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this is also showcased in how we talk with each other. So whether we speak confrontationally, if there is a moment of stress or a moment of discomfort, or if we avoid confrontation. And so that's the horizontal dimension here. So you see the US somewhat confrontational, and as I said earlier, that really depends on where in the US you are. Here in the Southeast, where I am, confrontation at the workplace, not necessarily an effective strategy. Up in Boston or in Philadelphia, New York, yes, no problem. What's your problem? You got a problem with me?
Exactly.
And it would also be done in a fairly emotionally expressive way. Here in the Southeast, no, we don't do that very much. So you look at Mexico, avoiding confrontation, because that would be challenging one's face, one's public reputation, and you would do that in an emotionally expressive way. As you said earlier, you're using your whole body to communicate more than people in the US would do. I come from a country called Germany, which is also very confrontational and emotionally restrained. I learned over the years to be a little bit more in your face. However, I also learned to adjust that to my circumstances.
Right. And now you have these graphs. If you see Spain, for example, Spain is very confrontational, a lot more than the US, and very emotional expressive. The typical complaint of Mexicans who visit Spain is, oh my God, these Spanish, they're so rude, they're so aggressive. Because, in Spain, it's like, boom, right on your face. And Mexicans never do that, So that's the main difference. And I always tell Mexican trainees that I'm training, either going to another country or multicultural team building, I tell them, why do you think French, Spanish, and other cultures like to discuss, like to argue? Because it's an intellectual exercise. Yes. If we argue, if we discuss, we exercise our brain. And Mexicans say, yeah, but let's not fight. Let's exercise it, but without fighting.
Very, very, very well put. So we already talked a little bit about how we communicate differently. North Americans, gringos, English-speaking North Americans, they can be, if necessary, they can go into confrontation, and they do look you into the eye straight, and they will give you a straight no if their answer is a no. What's that like in Mexico?
Very good question. And that was one of the other roadblocks Mexicans have. They have a very hard time saying no. So of course, that also goes back to hierarchy and goes back to time. So then you start asking me for things to do. I cannot say no. I keep on saying yes. And then, of course, I get into 20 commitments, and then I can only deliver 10 because physically I can only deliver 10, right? But I didn't say no to the other 10. So the idea here is to try to learn, and this is something I incorporated this year. Japanese, they read the air. So you have to do the same with Mexicans. Read the air, read the signs, read their body language. Because when they need to say no, but they can't, you see them hesitant. They go like, yeah, sure, yeah, I'll do it. But they start looking somewhere down, or they start moving. They become nervous because they say, oh my God, I have to say no, but I can't. And now this is the 11th thing this guy wants me to do. And I cannot say no because I want to be a good team member. I want to be, I'm agreeable. So I'm going to say yes, but they immediately become uncomfortable. And you notice in the body language. So you have to read the silence, the air, to say,
okay, so if I can read the body, so if I have a visual, I can, if my senses are fine-tuned to it, I can read the body language and maybe detect the conflict, the internal conflict. What if I can't see that body language?
Because even in their tone of voice.
Yeah, but what if I'm on the phone? If I don't see their body language, let's say you're on a phone conference and you don't see your Mexican counterparts. What are some of the tonalities or the choice of words you need to?
You immediately will receive a silence, a longer silence, and they will go, yeah, sure, okay. You hear in their voice they're hesitant.
Great.
Because they're horribly uncomfortable to say no. They wish they could say no, and they're not going to say no. But you hear this, okay, yeah, maybe you hear them. I'm exaggerating,
Excellent.
of course, but you will hear that immediately, the tone of voice.
Thanks for that. That's what I wanted to drive home.
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen us use these grids where you see different national cultures plotted on a map. These are results of cultural assessment tools. We used two different ones that, well, they have different product names. The underlying science behind them isn't too much different. One is called GlobeSmart Profile. The other one is called Country Navigator. I'll show you quickly what they do and what they look like. I will not, I mean, we can do a whole webinar on each one of these tools to walk you through the details.
Yeah.
This is what GlobeSmart looks like. So we create we have a national profile for the US and one for Mexico, and the cultures are plotted along 5 different dimensions. You see here independent versus interdependent, or in other words, hierarchical over here, excuse me, group orientation over here, individualism over there. You see US egalitarian, Mexico very much more status hierarchical. How do we handle risk? US Americans happy to take risks, Mexicans somewhere in the middle, not quite as
so
risk
much.
happy. And so these are the 5 dimensions. This tool is available online. It has, you create your own profile by answering a set of standardized questions, and you can actually plot yourself into the country dimension comparison, so you can compare your own profile with that of Mexico, that of the US, and many other cultures. Again, that would lead us down a rabbit hole that we don't want to take time for today. Let's schedule a call if you want to learn more how this can be used. This is super effective in cultural coaching and training situations, as well as if you're in a training and development position in your company. This can be a great tool to work with your team. The second tool that we use frequently is the Country Navigator tool, which is comparing not on 5 different levels. You see here 9 different levels of comparison, and just for the fun of it, I included my profile and Salvador's profile. So mine is blue, Salvador's is green, and you see Mexico and US on that grid as well. So this is how these tools can compare individual cultural profiles with that of national cultures. Salvador, you had a comment on this?
I was going to say, and I'm glad you put this slide up, because precisely if you see my dots that are the green and the orange that are Mexico, I'm not so close to the Mexican culture. I'm closer to your culture. That's why we're friends and colleagues, and we work well because we're very close to each other. And I'm also closer to US than to Mexico. And I remember before I took my first trainer for cross-cultural training back in 2001, before I went to Spain. That's why I liked it so much, because I began understanding things about my own culture, personal baggage, because I had the feeling, and maybe you had this feeling in Germany or in the US, that I didn't belong. I was, I'm Mexican, but why do I have this feeling that I don't belong? Well, now I know, because I'm quite far away. In the only one that I'm close is risk avoidant. That's the only one I'm closer to Mexico. But the rest, I'm pretty far away,
And I think this is also important to let our participants here in the webinar know, or if you're already working with tools similar to this, yes, there is national culture, and there is a national cultural average that you can create from the data that we have collected scientifically. However, that doesn't mean that there is the Mexican or the US American.
Exactly.
There are variants within every culture, and it's important to take those into account, and not one cultural training or coaching can't be the same as another. It really needs to look at the individual and compare them to the average dimensions. Again, more detail on that, we'd love to give you in a more closer session around this, or in a one-on-one. Now, the last thing before we guys let you go, we know we're getting close to the hour mark, so we want to make sure that you get your time's worth. And again, thank you for taking time today to join us.
Yes.
We've created this pie chart in order to illustrate that the work that Salvador and I do isn't some fuzzy nice to have. It is actually a critical piece that will be, or is the life insurance, the success insurance on your international global business. So we're looking here at the average cost of an expatriate assignment. You're sending someone into another culture for, let's say, 3 years, and this is the average cost you're putting into that. These numbers are collected from various sources, so this is an approximation. This is a snapshot. This is not to be taken super literally. However, it's a very close approximation. So you're sending someone overseas or into another culture, and that'll cost you as an employer somewhere between $1 or $2 million. And you see here broken down what are the cost drivers in that scenario. And compared to all this cost, that is your talent investment that you're basically putting at risk if your employee or their family is not functioning well in that new situation. And there is 1% of that cost on average is cultural training and coaching. 1% is destination services, so logistical support on the ground. 1% of that is language training that will help them, that will ensure their success in that new environment. So as I said here on the bottom, are you really willing to risk the entire pie just because you want to be cheap about that tiny slice? A question that that is a question I will leave with our audience. So you decide that for yourself. Don't tell us we didn't warn you. So the reason why we're doing this is not only to have a nice chat, because I always love chatting with Salvador. We also want to know from you, what is your biggest challenge right now in working between the English-speaking part of North America and the Spanish-speaking part? What is it that has been or continues to be a challenge, a problem, an issue for you? You may not be willing to share this here openly, and we totally get this. This is why we are open to having this conversation with you one-on-one. This is our offer to you. We're in the spirit of the last year of the month. This, in the Christian world, this is the Christmas month. It is a tradition of gift giving. So, yes, Hank, I see your raised hand. We'll get back to you in a second. So you will use this email address. Ideally, this will go to my inbox. However, Salvador and I are joined at the hip, especially when it comes to US-Mexican business. Please use this email to schedule with us. We can get a one-on-one or a two-on-one or a two-on-many in your organization, depending on how many people on your end want to be part of this conversation. We're here to serve you. We are here to make you more successful in your US-Mexican business context. So this is how you get in touch to schedule a consultation. And obviously, Salvador has his own email and his own phone number. So this is how you stay in touch. Hank, you raised your hand, and I see that. Is there a way you can chat and put your question in the chat box, and we'd be happy to address that right here, right now. However, if you need to run and others need to run, Hank, feel free to use the email. Let me go back one slide. Use this email. Send me the question. Send us the question. And both Salvador and I will get back with you at our earliest convenience. All right. Yes, I see other questions coming in here on a one-on-one. Yes, Hank, we see it. Thank you. Welcome. Stay in touch with us. You will. And here's the thing. We should have told you this at the get-go. I'm sure you've been taking excessive notes and wrote everything down we said. You will receive a link to the recording of this webinar where you have access to these slides. Isn't that awesome? Right. So this concludes today's webinar, Building Bridges, and you see it here. We built bridges across two different mindsets, building bridges across the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo. Funny how that river has two different names on each side, right? Maybe we can agree on a common name.
Maybe we can call it Grande Bravo. You know, it's big and it's brave.
Huh? Rio Grande Bravo. Salvador, last words from you before we call it off.
Well, thank you everybody for participating, and again, as Christian said, feel free to contact us and believe us. when someone takes this training, the level of stress and the level of adaptation increases a lot. The stress reduces because you're going to go through an adapting process, but when you know it's there, it's a lot easier.
Yes.
And we're willing to help you. We're both passionate about what we do. We've been working together for maybe 5 years now or so. We've been in the industry for over 15 years. So we know what we're talking about, and we like helping everybody. So don't hesitate. Whenever you need help, just raise your hand and we'll be there to help.
I have nothing to add to that. That was beautiful, Salvador. Thank you, everybody. Watch out for you. In your inbox, you get the link to the recording. And thank you, everybody, for taking time today. If you don't hear from me before the next year, then Feliz Navidad. And what is the day after tomorrow in Mexico? La Lady Guadalupe?
On the 12th, exactly. It's Our Lady of Guadalupe, Virgin Guadalupe. So it's a major celebration for a lot of Catholics, and it's almost a national holiday. So yeah.
There we go. So have a wonderful holiday season in December, and we look forward to
everybody
you individually. Thank you, Salvador.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.